Hey guys, what is up? You're here with another chapter of The Only Thing to Fear. And today we're on to chapter 11. I can't believe it. We're getting so far. It's so exciting. So, today's book shout out is, it's a lot of books because I couldn't name some. Okay, so which one? We will not. Okay, anyway, here we go. Here's Hitler's Youth Growing Up in Hitler's Shadow. So it's a really cool book. It's a nonfiction book, so it may be different than what I've been giving. Oh my god, I can't think or can't speak today. Giving suggestions for. So this is a book about It's a book about growing up in Hitler's shadow, a lot more than it is just being in Hitler's Youth, because I don't know if any of you heard about it, but it also has a lot of stuff on the White Rose movement, which was a movement that defied Hitler. So that is one thing. And there's not much else that there needs to be talked about before we get into this next chapter. Yeah! So excited. Okay, so book suggestion done. Let's get right into it. Chapter 11. Garrison and Uncle Red spent the entire evening hunched over the kitchen table, going over the layout of Fort Gorg and the terrain of Greenfield, making up an old map that Uncle Red dug up in the barn. Marking up an old map. Okay. After a late dinner of boiled beef and cabbage, one of the few dinners Zara knew how to make, the two men slipped out the back door to scout out the fort in person. She was tempted to follow them like she did with Miss Tally, but she had a hunch Uncle Red would catch her with those watchful eyes. I'll talk to Garrison on my own, Zara thought. He and Farragut needed all the recruits they could get, she reasoned. But after she thought about how to approach Garrison, Zara realized he would probably shoo her away like Uncle Red had, albeit more diplomatically. No matter how much she wanted to join the rebels, she was getting refused at every turn. So she decided to take matters into her own hands. Dun dun dun! After Garrison left early the next morning, Zara set her plan into motion. As nightfall blanketed Greenfield on Wednesday evening, a day before the planned attack on Camp Hammerstein, Zara slipped out of bed to get ready for her own mission. She scanned the sky beyond her window for any sign of Sentinel Atkin. He was overdue for a weekly night patrol, but he tended to stay on base whenever it rained. Luckily for her, a thick sheet of clouds had gathered over Greenfield, pregnant with a spring storm. Zara returned to her mattress and yanked out a stack of papers that she had hidden underneath. She had spent the night before scribbling on each sheet by hand until she reached over 200 copies. The message was simple. Channel 7, Evening News. Don't miss it. She had stolen the blank papers from school and had written everything longhand, too nervous to use the Academy's copy machines. She knew it was risky to leave her handwriting for the Nazis to find, but it was a risk she had to take. Even if the Germans discovered one of these slips of papers, they'd have to check everyone's penmanship in Greenfield before they discovered her. Zara tucked the papers into an old backpack, the same one she had worn to primary school, and was about to tiptoe out the door when her boot crunched on a sheet of newspaper. She picked it up earlier that day. Bastian had slipped this article to her while she was dousing the boys' locker room with bleach. "Read this, please," he said, pressing the paper into her hand. "And I'm sorry about your friend, Fra Tally." His fingers had lingered on hers before he stammered something about running late and hurried out the door. Zara watched him go, rubbing the spot where her skin had been brushed. Normally she would have shuddered at a Nazi's touch, but Bastian's hadn't been rough like her father's soldiers would have been. Instead, his left hand felt soft and warm on hers, surprisingly gentle. Then Zara scouted herself for thinking such a thing. She uncrinkled the article. Even in the dark room, she could make out the words. It had appeared in the Brussels Post and was dated a month prior. Gestapo arrest resistance members. Christens Wagner, Brussels Bureau. In a late-night raid, Okay, so I'm reading an article right now. So I'll tell you when I'm stopped. Okay. In a late-night raid, the Gestapo arrested 50 members of the Widerstand, a terrorist group with a network throughout Western Europe. These criminals have been charged with 30 counts of treason and 12 acts of terrorism, including the bombing of the Düsseldorf railway in June that led to deaths of 53 German citizens. We have been tracking activity of this particular Widerstand chapter for nearly 3 years, said Chief Sergeant Bernhard Backer. This arrest will ensure the safety of the citizens of Brussels, who have been forced to live in fear since these animals arrived in our city. Key arrests in this raid included Arthur Farber and Edith Huber, leaders of the underground Communist Party of Germany, which was banned in 1933. The Gestapo also arrested Albert de Boy, another communist sympathizer and former veteran of the Nazi Navy. Du Bois' son-in-law, Colonel Erich Eckhart, released this statement upon his father-in-law's arrest. My family denounces the actions of Herr Du Bois. He has brought shame to us in the Nazi Empire, and shall deserve any punishment he receives. End quote. The article continued, but Zara had stopped reading. After this granted, she had slipped into the computer lab to empty its garbage pails and to do some research of her own. She discovered half a dozen articles similar to this one, citing the traitorous Albert de Bois. Apparently, Bastian had spoken the truth about his grandfather, although she wouldn't let herself believe his story about wanting to join the Alliance. He could be using this information to gain her trust, and she was smarter than that. Sarah stuffed the article under her bed. She would burn it later and crept out the back door with her bag slung over her shoulders, avoiding the creakiest floorboards so she wouldn't wake her uncle. The two of them hadn't spoken much since Garrison's visit. For years she had gone along with his wishes because she thought he would one day give her a chance. But after Garrison's visit, she wondered if that one day would ever come. Her uncle only wanted to protect her. She knew that, but this time she couldn't listen to him. Thunder rumbled overhead as she darted towards Greenfield, and toward a cluster of shabby houses many of the miner families called home. She crept to the tree-ridden hill overlooking the houses, and removed the papers from her bag. Then she summoned a wind at her fingertips, letting it build until her hair lashed against her face and pages rattled in her hands. She released all 200 of them at once. The papers whirled toward the houses, their white color like dove's wings against the black night. With a storm coming soon, Zara tried to steer the flyers under the creaky porches or windsills to keep them dry from the rain. The miners would find the papers in the morning, and there was a chance they would just throw the slips away. But maybe their interest would get piqued, and they'd spread the word across town. Then the whole township would turn to Channel 7 tomorrow night, just as she and Garrison hoped. Zara knew it wasn't much, but it was the least she could do for the Alliance, right under her uncle's vigilant eye. Lightning threaded across the sky, and a heavy thread of rain lingered in the air. But she didn't head home. With the papers scattered, she still needed to tackle the second part of her mission, a mission she had hoped her uncle would undertake. But her hope had drooped after yesterday's conversation. Perhaps he could put off burying Miss Tally. But Zara certainly couldn't. She hadn't been able to save Miss Tally from Sentinel Braun's powers, but she could give her a proper farewell. With the courthouse in sight, Zara quietly passed the grocer and the drugstore, and then she donned her knitted mask. She veered a hard left to approach the small military museum that was tucked behind the courthouse. The museum had closed hours before, but Zara scouted around it anyway, though she doubted any Nazis would take a rain-soaked nightly stroll. She scaled the slippery fire escape to the building's roof, then crept to the very edge, her gaze fixed on the courthouse that lay 100 feet ahead. A shiver rippled through Zara's spine, a mixture of cold and fear. The last time she was here this late, she had ripped apart the Führer's portrait, but now that seemed trivial compared to what she planned to do. Eyes squinted. Zara spotted a single soldier on the square rooftop, dressed in olive green poncho. Colonel Eckhart must have assigned him to the square after Dieter's portrait was vandalized. It was a good thing she had come prepared. Sarah gauged the distance between the two buildings and rose slowly to her feet. Her fingers snuck into her bag and pulled out a tranquilizer needle that she had taken from the barn, the needles that her uncle used to sedate the milking cows from time to time. Up on the rooftop, the soldier turned away from Zara. It was now or never. She took off from the rooftop, rocketed toward the courthouse. The wind picked up as it carried her, its sound masking her approach. And she pointed the needle at the soldier's neck. He's only 20 feet away now. 10, now 5. But the soldier spun around at the last second. Crying out, he reached for his gun. Zara's feet hit the roof and she lunged at him, but the soldier knocked her away. The needle tumbled into a puddle. Wow, that is hard to say. Rolling out of her reach. As the soldier fumbled for his pistol, Zara quickly threw herself on top of him, scrambling for the gun, not knowing what else to do. Her plan was crumbling to pieces in front of her. With a grunt, the soldier rolled over and pinned Zara down to this. He reached for the mask. "You'll be sorry for this," he cried in German. Zara clawed at his arms, but he weighed twice as much as she did. His fingers nearly caught the edge of her mask before she jerked his jaw out of reach. But she couldn't dodge him forever. Once the soldier saw her face, it would be all over. She fought back, legs thrashing, fueled by heart-pumping fear. Fingernails tore at every inch of exposed skin. She tried to shove the soldier off of her, but he was too heavy, too strong. The soldier yanked at the mask again, uncovering her jawbone. Zara's hands grew boiling hot, both of them like stinging needles. The needles traveled up her arms, and she thought she might pass out. But then the guard went limp. His eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he slumped over, his limbs dead weight on top of her. The heart receded from her hands, along with the prickling needles. She ripped the mask off her face, breathing hard, and tried to push the soldier off of her. But she froze when she caught movement on the roof. I'm having a hard time focusing. A shadow fell over Zara's eyes. A hooded man crouched next to her and rolled the guard from her body. In his right hand he held a loose brick, its edges stained with blood. He must have used it to knock the soldier unconscious. The man dropped the brick and pulled back his hood. "Sheesh." Or something. I don't know what it's called, and I don't know. I'm gonna say sheesh. "Are you hurt?" "Bastian," Zara cried. He offered his hand to her, but she only blinked at him. Raindrops splashed his forehead. Hello. "What are you doing here?" "My mother needed a prescription from the drugstore," he stuttered. "When I came out, I thought I saw you heading towards the courthouse." "You followed me?" The blood emptied from Zara's face and plummeted toward her toes. Had he seen her flying onto the rooftop? But Bastian wasn't making any accusations. "I was curious. I slipped into the courthouse through the back entrance. It was unlocked." Bastian went on. I thought you might be doing something for the Alliance. And I thought if I joined you tonight that I could prove my intentions are sincere." Zara's mouth opened, then closed. Could he be telling the truth? Her gaze found the unconscious soldier at her feet. Bastian collared one of his father's men to save her, but her uncle's caution seeped through her. As far-fetched as it sounded, this could all still be part of Colonel Eckhart's plan to catch both her and her uncle. "What were you trying to do here?" "I can help," Bastian continued. "I don't need your help at all." Her gaze crept toward Miss Tally's body, but she couldn't finish her mission now, not with Bastian watching. She had no idea how to explain what she was doing here on the roof. Taking a stroll, stargazing? Fear clutched her heart. She could turn her into his father right now. There would be nothing she could do. Bastian didn't seem to be waiting for an explanation, though. He's staring at the cage instead. "Did you come to pay your respects to your friend?" "Yeah, I did. To say goodbye," she blurted out, snatching at the excuse he offered her. He glanced at the rooftop door. She really needed to leave before Bastian asked her another question, but he kept talking. "My father shouldn't have paraded her like this." A jolt of lightning cracked over them, illuminating their faces. Zara saw steel in Bastian's eyes, his jaw hard. He strode over to the very edge of the roof where the cage sat and reached his arm around to open the metal door. "What are you doing?" Zara hurried after him, her pulse frantic, Bastian's feet hugged the lip of the roof, only inches from the open air. If he fell, taking her down. She's your friend, isn't she? Yes, but you're going to fall. He reached for the latch anyway. The Nazis did the same thing to Opa. They dragged his body through the streets of Brussels. The steel in his eyes burned hot. Get down from there. Sarah wasn't going to be responsible for the death of Colonel Eckhart's son. As lightning flashed above them, he climbed up to yank him down. She climbed up. But Bastian lost his footing. His arms flapped, his feet teetered. He clutched at Zara in the cage, but gravity snatched them both, along with the cage, toward the ground. As they careened downward, they plummeted 4 stories before Zara's instincts took over. She gasped out a command in her mind. Just like that, they stopped. The wind cradled them, holding them 10 feet above the ground. Bastian's cry silenced in his throat. His eyes went frighteningly wide, so wide that she could see the whites of them. That was when Zara realized what she had done. And that is the end of chapter 11. That was definitely a short chapter. Right now I'm checking to see whoa, but chapter 12 is long. Jeez. Okay. So chapter 12 is going to be longer, but that was chapter 11. That was definitely a fun chapter. So I guess let me think. Yeah, that's basically the beginning of the end in terms of the story. That is where the final part starts when, the fun part starts really when, Channel 7 happens. And that's only 2 chapters away. So that is very exciting. So you guys need to come back and make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. And I'll see you guys later. Right? Yeah. Oops. I totally ruined that. I'm terrible at endings. Oh yeah, put in the comments if, you know any other YouTubers that are totally terrible at endings. Because I'm definitely. Anyway, see you guys later.